As we reported earlier, demonstrations took place last night in Louisville and across the nation following a Kentucky grand jury's decision to not indict police officers in the fatal shooting of Breonna Taylor. Hundreds of demonstrators chanted Taylor's name and marched in cities including New York and Washington, D.C. Taylor, an emergency medical worker, was shot multiple times by white officers who entered her home during a narcotics investigation 6 months ago. No drugs were found inside. Joining me now on Skype is Archbishop Joseph Kurtz of the Archdiocese of Louisville. Your Excellency, welcome back to the show. We're grateful you're on.
Well, thank you, Tracy. It's good to be with you this evening. Thank you.
Well, as you know, reaction to yesterday's grand jury decision regarding the death of Breonna Taylor has been widespread, with demonstrations across the country and unrest overnight there in Louisville, including the shooting of 2 police officers. What's your message to those who feel that justice wasn't served in this case?
Well, of course, the primary message that we need, I think, all to gather together on is the need for us to be united in opposing the ugly sin of racism, and also to be united in supporting first responders, because we together need to be able to be a community that addresses these very difficult questions. I mourn, as so many do, the tragic death of Breonna Taylor. We also don't have a script to say, well, this is exactly the right steps to take, but I do know this, that as a community, we are going to need to unite in order to together oppose the sin of racism, so that we're not simply furthering division. We certainly need to reject violence as any solution. It simply moves us backwards. But there is a need for us as a church also to step forward. And I think members of our church want to be part of that, ambassadors who are willing to work for peace, but also confront the issues of racism that, as we've said so often, raise their ugly head too often.
Yesterday, you issued a statement in which you spoke about, quote, the nation's original sin of racism, and you just mentioned that with us. Can you talk a little bit more about that and also the effects?
Sure. Well, of course, we don't want to confuse that with our own doctrine of original sin, but it is a common phrase that is being used now in order to talk about the deep-seated nature of racism and the fact that it affects us not simply by what I might say are sins of commission, efforts to actually treat someone with hatred, which of course robs the dignity of both the speaker and the person spoken to, but also, I think, sins of omission, in which we find ourselves not giving opportunities to people. And we see that in all people, but especially in our young people. People should not be denied opportunities because of the color of their skin. We know that respect for human life and what we'll be doing throughout the month of October in respecting human life means in a very concrete way that the person in front of us is the person needed to be treated with dignity. So I think that is exactly, Tracy, what we're talking about, that as Catholics, each of us look for the opportunity to take that first step, not to be uninvolved, but to say, with God's grace, I can make a difference in treating people with the dignity that I want others to treat me with.
Let's talk about the way forward. How do you see that in bringing about healing and racial justice?
Well, you know, there's no substitute for putting a face on any situation. As long as something remains abstract, we can talk about it in a distant way. But of course, we know that efforts being made to reach out, to mourn, for example, the tragic death of Breonna Taylor, to pray for her family, but also to look for opportunities that are right within our own circle, being able to reach out to people regardless of the color of their skin, and to be able together to give opportunities for people. We have many such opportunities. Most of our parishes, for example, have people coming of all different ethnic and racial backgrounds, and the need for us to find a way to take that step. It'll be different, of course, for each person, but it might be those with whom you work, for young people going to school, those with whom you're going to school with. And the tried and true approach is pray, educate, and act. So we need together to pray that the racial divides might be narrowed and ended. We need to educate ourselves because there are even unknown biases that we all grow up with. We know that. But we also need to then very prayerfully and carefully find ways to take a step of action. And that can be revealed to us in many ways, and it's really an act of our faith. This is part of our Catholic social teaching, to treat people with great dignity.
Well, Your Excellency, thank you so much for coming on today. We really do appreciate your time. Archbishop Joseph Kurtz of the Archdiocese of Louisville. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tracy.